These are stories from a time when fairy tales were not meant to comfort children, but to warn them, when mythology carried the weight of divine truth, and when literature reflected the harsh realities of the world as it was. Let this be your moment to settle. The world outside can wait. Tonight, we wander through the Brothers Grimm and their German forests, through Hans Christian Andersen's melancholic Danish shores, through French courts and Italian manuscripts, through Greek temples and colonial America. Some discoveries may surprise you, others will simply drift by like autumn leaves on dark water. If this helps you unwind, a like helps others find their way here too. But for now, let's begin our journey into the shadows that Disney's light once obscured. The Brothers Grimm, Jacob and Wilhelm, were not storytellers in the way we might imagine them today. They were scholars, linguists, collectors of the oral traditions that had survived centuries in German-speaking lands. In the early 1800s, they traveled through villages and towns, sitting by firesides, listening to the voices of peasants and servants who carried within them the folk tales their grandmothers had whispered. These were not tales created for children's bedtimes, though children heard them. They were stories meant to teach through fear, to embed social rules and moral warnings so deeply that they would never be forgotten. The first edition of their kind under House Merchant, published in 1812, contained stories in their rawest form before the brothers began to soften them in later editions. Even so, what remained was darker than anything Walt Disney would later imagine. The Grimms believed they were preserving something ancient and essential, the soul of the German people captured in these strange, violent, magical narratives that had somehow survived the passage of time. In the Grimm version of Snow White, published in that first edition of 1812, the story ends, not with a wedding kiss and happily ever after, but with a punishment that reveals the tale's true nature as a moral warning. The evil queen, Snow White's stepmother, is invited to the wedding feast, not knowing that the bride is the stepdaughter she believed dead. When she arrives and recognizes Snow White alive and radiant, the punishment is already prepared. Iron shoes have been heating in the fire until they glow red, until the metal itself seems to writhe with heat. The queen is forced to put on these burning shoes, and she must dance and dance and dance until at last she falls dead. The Grimms did not describe this as cruelty, but as justice, as the natural consequence of wickedness. This was how fairy tales taught their lessons in those days, not through gentle moral discussions, but through images so vivid and terrible that they would be impossible to forget. The smoke from those iron shoes, the smell of burning, the queen's final dance, all of it was meant to embed itself in the listener's mind as a warning against vanity, jealousy, and murderous intent. Cinderella, or as the Grimms called her, Aschenputtel, tells a story that is both familiar and shockingly different. From the animated film where mice sew dresses and pumpkins become carriages, in the German telling, there is no fairy godmother, only a hazel tree that grows on the grave of Cinderella's dead mother, watered by the girl's tears. When Cinderella needs help, she goes to this tree and calls to the little white bird that lives there, and the bird throws down whatever she needs, including a golden dress and silver slippers for the ball. The prince is enchanted, but when midnight comes and Cinderella flees, he has coated the palace stairs with pitch to trap her, and one slipper sticks fast. The next day, when the prince arrives with the golden slipper, the stepsisters see their chance. The elder sister is taken to a chamber by her mother, who hands her a knife and tells her to cut off her toe, for when she is queen, she will not need to walk. The girl does this, forcing her bleeding foot into the slipper, and the prince begins to ride away with her, believing he has found his bride. But the little birds from the hazel tree call out a warning, telling the prince to look at the blood seeping from the slipper. He returns the elder sister and takes the younger, and the stepmother again produces the knife, this time instructing her daughter to slice off her heel. Again the girl mutilates herself. Again she almost succeeds. And again the birds reveal the deception with their song about blood and wrongness. Finally, the prince demands to see Cinderella, the girl covered in ashes whom the stepmother has hidden. The slipper fits perfectly, and Cinderella becomes his bride. On the wedding day, as the bridal procession walks to the church, the two stepsisters position themselves on either side of Cinderella, hoping to gain favor through proximity. But the birds from the hazel tree swoop down and peck out the eyes of the elder sister, first the left eye, then the right, As the procession returns from the church, the birds attack again, taking the eyes of the younger sister. Thus, the stepsisters are punished for their cruelty and falsehood, left to live out their days in darkness, begging at street corners. The Grimms saw this not as excessive, but as proportional, as the kind of justice that made moral sense in their harsh world. The tale of Rapunzel, locked in her tower with her impossibly long hair, carries within it elements that later editors found too scandalous for children's ears. In early editions of the Grimm collection, the story reveals that the prince who climbs Rapunzel's hair does more than merely visit and sing with her. Rapunzel, innocent and isolated from the world, becomes pregnant, though she does not understand what is happening to her body. It is only when her dress no longer fits and she innocently asks the sorceress why her clothes have become so tight, that the enchantress discovers the truth. In a rage, the sorceress cuts off Rapunzel's beautiful hair and casts her out into the wilderness to give birth alone and suffer in poverty. When the prince next climbs the tower, he finds not Rapunzel, but the witch waiting with the severed braids. She mocks him and tells him he will never see Rapunzel again, and in his despair, the prince throws himself from the tower window. He survives the fall but lands in a thicket of thorns that pierce his eyes, leaving him blind. He wanders for years through the forest, until, by chance, he hears a familiar voice singing the same song Rapunzel once sang in her tower. He follows the sound and finds her living in poverty with their twin children, a boy and a girl. When Rapunzel sees him, her tears of joy fall upon his ruined eyes, and miraculously, his sight is restored. This story, like so many in the Grimm collection, underwent revision as the brothers released new editions throughout their lives. They softened details, removed references that might be considered improper, adjusted the stories to fit changing ideas about what children should hear. But they could not entirely erase the darkness, for it was essential to the tale's meaning. These were stories about consequences, about the price of desire and disobedience, about a world where magic existed but offered no easy solutions, where happy endings came only after terrible suffering, if they came at all. The tower, the hair, the blindness, the years of wandering, the tears of restoration, all of it formed a narrative that was far more complex than a simple romance. It was about isolation and connection, about innocence lost and wisdom gained, about punishment and redemption woven together in ways that reflected the complicated reality of human life. The Grimms believed these complications were necessary, that children needed to understand that the world was not kind, that choices mattered, that actions had consequences that could not always be undone. In the story of the Frog Prince, which Disney transformed into a tale of a kiss breaking a spell, the original tells something quite different. A princess plays with a golden ball near a well, and when she drops it into the water, a frog offers to retrieve it if she will promise to love him and let him eat from her plate and sleep in her bed. She agrees, thinking she can simply ignore a frog, but when the frog comes to the palace door that evening, demanding she keep her promise, her father, the king, insists that a promise made must be honored. The princess is disgusted but obeys. She lets the frog eat from her plate, though she can barely stand to watch. She lets him sleep on her pillow, though she finds him repulsive. And then, in the morning, instead of kissing the frog, as Disney would have it, the princess picks up the creature and throws him with all her strength against the wall. The violence of the act, the satisfying thud of the frog's body against stone, the princess's disgust finally expressing itself in physical force. This is what breaks the spell. The frog transforms into a handsome prince, and he explains that only her action, violent though it was, could free him from the enchantment. This moment reveals something the Grimms understood about human nature, that transformation often requires more than gentleness, that sometimes it takes force, resistance, even destruction, to break through to something new. The princess did not want to kiss the frog. She was revolted by him, and the Grimms did not shame her for this feeling. Instead, they showed that her very resistance, her willingness to act on her disgust, was what created the change. The prince was not offended. He was grateful, for he had been waiting for someone strong enough to break the spell. And strength in this story meant the courage to throw a frog against a wall, to refuse to pretend that repulsive things are beautiful, to act honestly even when that action seems cruel. It is a strange moral by modern standards, but it made perfect sense in the world of the Grimms, where truth mattered more than politeness, where breaking might be necessary for transformation, where violence and love were not always opposites but sometimes two sides of the same coin that could. bring about unexpected redemption. The tale of Little Red Riding Hood existed in many versions across Europe, but the Grimm brothers' telling included elements that revealed the story's purpose as a warning to young girls. In their version, the wolf tricks Red Riding Hood into revealing where her grandmother lives, then races ahead, devours the grandmother, and dresses in her clothes. When the girl arrives and notices how strange her grandmother looks, she asks the famous questions about big ears, big eyes, big teeth. The wolf's answers grow more ominous with each reply, until finally he leaps from the bed and swallows the girl whole, just as he had swallowed her grandmother. In the Grimm telling, a huntsman happens to pass by the cottage and hears strange snoring. He becomes suspicious, enters, and seeing the wolf's distended belly, cuts it open with his shears. Out spring Red Riding Hood and her grandmother, both still alive in the darkness of the wolf's stomach. They filled the wolf's belly with heavy stones, and when he wakes and tries to flee, the weight drags him down and he dies. The moral of the story was clear to its original audience. Young girls should not stray from the path, should not talk to strangers, should not reveal private information to those with predatory intent. But there was another version, older still, that the French writer Charles Perrault had published in 1697, more than a century before the Grimm. In Perrault's telling, there is no huntsman, no rescue, no happy ending. The wolf eats the girl, and that is where the story ends. Perrault even included a moral poem at the end, making explicit what was already clear, that young ladies who listen to strangers may end up providing supper for wolves. The Grimms, writing in the 19th century, felt compelled to soften this ending, to provide hope and rescue, but they could not entirely erase the tale's darkness, for the warning needed to be strong enough to be effective. The image of the wolf dressed in grandmother's nightgown, the sight of those sharp teeth in that familiar face, the moment of recognition that comes too late, these were meant to create a fear that would stay with a child, that would make her wary of deception, that would teach her to question what she saw and to trust her instincts when something felt wrong. The fairy tale was a tool of survival, dressed in the clothes of a bedtime story. Sleeping Beauty, or Dornrechen as the Grimms called her, sleeps for 100 years after pricking her finger on a spindle, fulfilling the curse of a slighted fairy. This much Disney kept, but the Grimm's version includes details that speak to the passage of time in ways that are both beautiful and unsettling. When the princess falls asleep, everyone in the castle falls asleep with her. The king and queen frozen mid-conversation, the cook with his hand raised to strike the kitchen boy, the maid with her fingers in another girl's hair, the horses in the stables, the dogs in the yard, the doves on the roof, even the flies on the wall. Time stops, and a hedge of thorns grows up around the castle, thick and impenetrable, rising higher with each passing year until the entire palace is hidden from view. Many princes hear the legend and attempt to cut through the thorns to reach the sleeping princess, but the thorns are alive with malevolent magic. They catch the young men and hold them fast, and the princes die there, trapped in the thorns, their bodies eventually becoming part of the hedge itself, their bones woven into the barrier that protects the castle from any who would disturb its sleep. Only when exactly 100 years have passed does a prince arrive and find the thorns pulling back of their own accord, opening a path where dozens of his predecessors had found only death. He walks through unharmed and finds the castle in its enchanted stillness, everything exactly as it was a century before. The cobwebs are thick with undisturbed dust. The air carries the particular quality of spaces that have been sealed away from time's passage. He climbs the stairs to the highest tower and finds the princess sleeping, and when he kisses her, the spell breaks. She wakes, and with her, everyone in the castle wakes. The cook finally strikes the kitchen boy. The maid finishes braiding the other girl's hair. The flies resume their buzzing. Time begins again, and it is as if no moment has passed at all, though 100 years have gone by in the world beyond the thorns. The prince and princess marry, and the story ends in celebration. But the Grimms did not let their listeners forget the young men who died in the thorns, whose timing was wrong, who paid with their lives for attempting to wake the princess before her appointed hour. Hansel and Gretel tells the story of two children abandoned in the forest by parents too poor to feed them. A situation that would have been horrifyingly familiar to the Grimm's original audience. Famine was real, child abandonment was real, and the story reflected these harsh realities, even as it wrapped them in magic and wonder. The father is reluctant, but the stepmother insists, and so the parents lead the children deep into the woods and leave them there with only a small fire and a promise to return. Hansel has overheard the plan and filled his pockets with white pebbles that shine in the moonlight, leaving a trail that allows the children to find their way home. But when the parents try again, Hansel has only breadcrumbs to mark the path, and the birds eat them, leaving the children truly lost. They wander until they find a house made of bread and cake and sugar-paned windows, and they begin to eat, for they are starving. The house belongs to a witch who feeds on children. She locks Hansel in a cage to fatten him, and forces Gretel to cook for her brother, checking each day to see if the boy is plump enough to eat by feeling his finger through the bars. But Hansel tricks her by offering a small bone instead of his finger, and the nearly blind witch cannot tell the difference. Eventually, she grows impatient and decides to cook him anyway. She orders Gretel to climb into the oven to check if it is hot enough, planning to shove the girl inside and cook her too. But Gretel, who has understood the witch's intention, pretends not to know how to climb in and asks for a demonstration. When the witch bends to show her, Gretel pushes with all her strength, shoving the old woman into the flames and slamming the oven door shut. The witch's screams fill the house, but Gretel does not relent. She waits until the screaming stops, until she is certain the witch is dead, and only then does she free her brother. They find the witch's treasure, pearls and precious stones, fill their pockets, and make their way home. When they arrive, they discover their stepmother has died, and their father welcomes them with tears of joy. The treasure makes them wealthy, and they live happily ever after. But the story does not forget what the children had to do to survive: the killing of the witch, the understanding that sometimes survival requires terrible choices, that mercy to the cruel is cruelty to the innocent. The story of Rumpelstiltskin centers on a miller who boasts that his daughter can spin straw into gold, a lie that catches the attention of the king. The king locks the girl in a room full of straw and tells her to spin it into gold by morning or die. She weeps, for she has no such power. And then a strange little man appears and offers to do it for her in exchange for her necklace. She agrees, and by morning, the room is full of gold. The king is pleased but greedy. He locks her in a larger room with more straw, and again the little man appears, this time demanding her ring. On the third night, in the largest room yet, she has nothing left to give, and so the little man demands her firstborn child. Desperate, she agrees, and he spins the straw into gold. The king marries her, and she becomes queen, and when her first child is born, she has nearly forgotten the promise. But the little man returns to claim what was promised. The queen begs and pleads, and finally he offers her a chance. If she can guess his name within 3 days, she may keep the child. She sends messengers throughout the kingdom, collecting every name they can find, and for 2 days, she guesses wrong. Caspar, Melchior, Balthazar, hundreds of names, all wrong. On the third day, a messenger returns with strange news. Deep in the forest, he saw a little man dancing around a fire, singing a song that revealed his name, Rumpelstiltskin. When the little man arrives that evening, confident of his victory, the queen guesses other names first, drawing out the moment, and then finally speaks the name Rumpelstiltskin. The little man's rage is terrible. He stamps his foot so hard that it goes through the floor, and then, in his fury, he grabs his other foot and tears himself in two, splitting his own body apart in his anger. The Grimms did not explain why he had this power or why he wanted the child. The strangeness of his desire, the mystery of his magic, the violence of his self-destruction, all of it remained unexplained, and this was part of the tale's power. Not everything could be understood. Not every question had an answer. Magic existed, and it had its own rules, and mortals could only hope to outwit it through cleverness and luck. The queen saved her child through a combination of both. But the image of the little man tearing himself apart remained as a reminder that magic, when thwarted, when denied what it believed it was owed, could turn on itself with terrible force. The Brothers Grimm published 7 editions of their tales between 1812 and 1857, and with each edition, they made changes, softening some elements, adding Christian morality to others, adjusting the stories to fit their evolving understanding of what the German people needed to hear. But they could not entirely domesticate these tales, for their power came from their wildness, from their roots in pre-Christian traditions where magic was real and dangerous, where forests were full of threats, where stepmothers plotted and children suffered, where justice was harsh and transformation was possible but never easy. These were stories that had survived centuries of telling around fires and in spinning rooms, stories that had adapted to each generation while maintaining their essential core. The Grimms believed they were saving something precious, the voice of the folk, the wisdom of the common people. the dark dreams that revealed truth. When Walt Disney's artists sat down to adapt these tales more than a century later, they faced the challenge of taking these strange, violent, morally complex narratives and transforming them into something that could be shown to children in darkened theaters, something that would end not with dancing in iron shoes or eyes pecked out by birds, but with a kiss, a wedding, a promise that love conquers all. The distance between the Grimm's Aschenputtel and Disney's Cinderella measures more than just cultural change. It measures the journey from a world where fairy tales warned of real dangers to a world where they promised escape from them. Hans Christian Andersen was not a collector of folktales like the Brothers Grimm, but an author, a creator of original stories that drew from folklore traditions while adding his own deeply personal, often melancholic vision. Born in 1805 in Odense, Denmark, to a poor washerwoman and a shoemaker who dreamed of better things, Andersen grew up surrounded by stories but also by poverty, social exclusion, and a profound sense of not belonging. These experiences shaped every tale he wrote. His stories were not passed down through generations of peasant wisdom, but emerged from his own imagination, his own sorrows, his own understanding of suffering and beauty intertwined. He wrote in Danish during the 1830s through 1870s, and his tales carried a distinctly literary quality, a self-consciousness about narrative and meaning that set them apart from folk tales, where the Grimms presented stories as if they had always existed. Andersen wrote, as an artist who knew he was creating something new, even as he drew on ancient patterns. His stories often ended in tragedy, or in ambiguous redemption, or in transformation that came at terrible cost. They reflected his Christian faith, his belief in the immortal soul, his conviction that suffering could be redemptive, and his deep sadness about the cruelty of the world. The Little Mermaid, published in 1837 as Den Lille Havfru, tells a story that Disney transformed almost beyond recognition, keeping only the basic premise of a mermaid who falls in love with a human prince. In Andersen's original, the Little Mermaid lives at the bottom of the sea, with her grandmother and 5 sisters, in a kingdom of coral and strange flowers and shipwrecked treasures. Mermaids live for 300 years, but when they die, they dissolve into sea foam and cease to exist, for they have no immortal souls. Only humans have souls that live forever. On her 15th birthday, the Little Mermaid is finally allowed to swim to the surface, as each mermaid princess is permitted to do when she comes of age. She sees a ship, and on that ship, a young prince celebrating his birthday. A storm comes, the ship is wrecked, and the Little Mermaid saves the prince from drowning, bringing him to shore. She watches from the waves as another young woman finds him, and she sees him smile at this woman, believing she saved him. The Little Mermaid swims away, and from that moment, she is changed, for she has fallen in love, not only with the prince, but with the idea of the immortal soul that humans possess. She goes to the sea witch, who lives in a terrifying part of the ocean where nothing grows, where the water is cold and still, where polyps reach out with their arms toward anything that passes. The sea witch agrees to help, but warns of the price. She will give the Little Mermaid a potion that will split her tail into legs, but every step she takes will feel as though she is walking on sharp knives, as though the ground itself is cutting into her flesh. She will be the most graceful dancer anyone has ever seen, but each movement will bring agony, and she must give up her voice, for the sea witch will cut out her tongue as payment. The Little Mermaid agrees to all of this. She drinks the potion, and the transformation is described as feeling as though a sword is being driven through her body. She wakes on the shore near the prince's palace with legs, unable to speak, and when she tries to stand, the pain is exactly as the witch promised. Every step is torment, but she does not cry out, for she has no voice to cry with. She can only smile and dance, and the prince is enchanted by her grace, though he thinks of her as a sweet child, an amusing companion, not as a potential bride. The prince is kind to her. He gives her silk cushions and lets her sleep outside his door like a faithful page. He takes her riding, even though the horse's movements send shooting pains through her legs. He watches her dance, marveling at how beautifully she moves, never knowing that each pirouette, each graceful step, is purchased with suffering she cannot express. She loves him desperately, completely, and he loves her too. But as one loves a dear sister or a devoted friend, he tells her about the girl who found him on the beach after the shipwreck, the girl he believes saved his life. He says that if he were ever forced to marry, he would choose someone like her, and he touches the Little Mermaid's hand as he says this, and she smiles, for she knows she is the one who truly saved him, though she can never tell him so. time passes, and the Little Mermaid learns that the prince is to marry a princess from a neighboring kingdom. When he sees this princess, he is astonished, for she is the girl from the beach, the one he thought had saved him. The mystery is explained. The princess had been visiting a temple near the shore, and it was she who found him. The prince is overjoyed. He will marry the girl who saved his life, or so he believes, and he asks the Little Mermaid to be happy for him, for surely she loves him enough to want his happiness. The wedding takes place on a ship, and the Little Mermaid is there, dressed in silk and gold, watching the prince marry another. That night, as the ship sails and celebration fills the air, she stands at the rail, looking into the dark water, and she knows that when dawn comes, she will die. For the sea which told her this as well, if the prince marries another, the Little Mermaid will die on the morning after his wedding, dissolving into foam on the waves, ceasing to exist. But her sisters appear in the water, their long hair cut short, for they have given their hair to the sea, which in exchange for a knife. They tell the Little Mermaid that if she plunges this knife into the prince's heart and lets his blood drip onto her feet, she will become a mermaid again. The pain will stop, and she can return to the sea and live out her 300 years. She takes the knife. She enters the cabin where the prince sleeps beside his new bride, their heads resting together, and she raises the knife. For a long moment, she stands there, and we might imagine what Andersen imagined. The weight of the blade, the sound of their breathing, the knowledge that one stroke could end all her suffering. But she cannot do it. She loves him too much. She throws the knife into the sea, and herself after it, and as the sun rises, she feels herself dissolving into foam. But this is not quite the end, for Andersen, who believed deeply in Christian redemption, could not let his Little Mermaid simply cease to exist. As she dissolves, she becomes aware of transparent beings around her, daughters of the air, spirits who exist between earth and heaven. They tell her that she can earn an immortal soul through good deeds, by bringing cooling breezes to hot countries and spreading the fragrance of flowers and bringing relief to suffering. After 300 years of service, she will have earned a soul and can enter heaven. The Little Mermaid joins them, and the story ends with her looking down at the prince, who stands on the ship's deck searching the waves for her, believing she has drowned. He will never know what she sacrificed for him, will never know that she gave up her voice, her home, her family, endured years of wordless agony, and finally chose his life over her own. This ending troubled many readers, for it seemed to suggest that suffering was noble, that self-sacrifice even unto death was the highest virtue, that love meant the complete erasure of the self. Andersen saw it differently. He saw the Little Mermaid's choice as transcendent, as proof of a love so pure that it transformed her very nature, giving her something better than 300 years as a mermaid, giving her the possibility of heaven itself. When Disney adapted this story in 1989, they kept the mermaid's longing for the human world but removed almost everything else. Disney's Ariel gets her voice back, marries her prince, and lives happily ever after on land, with her father's blessing and the sea which defeated. There are no knives, no pain with every step, no dissolving into foam, no ambiguous redemption through centuries of service. The changes were necessary, perhaps, for a children's film, but they fundamentally altered the story's meaning. Andersen's tale was about unrequited love, about suffering that is not rewarded with earthly happiness, about sacrifice that is complete and final, about choosing another's joy over one's own survival. It was about the longing for an immortal soul, a concept that made sense in Andersen's deeply Christian worldview, but seemed strange to modern, secular audiences. It was about a love so selfless that it could watch the beloved marry another and still choose his life, could give up everything, voice and home and future and life itself, for someone who would never even know. This kind of love appears in religious texts, in the lives of martyrs and saints, but rarely in fairy tales, and certainly not in Disney films. The distance between Andersen's tragic mermaid and Disney's triumphant Ariel measures not just changes in storytelling, but fundamental differences in what we believe about love, sacrifice, and whether suffering has meaning. The Snow Queen, published in 1844 as Snedroningen, is one of Andersen's longest and most complex tales, and it became the loose inspiration for Disney's Frozen. Though the two stories share little beyond a setting of ice and snow, and a female character with magical cold powers, Andersen's story begins with a demon who creates a mirror that distorts reality, making everything good and beautiful appear ugly and worthless, while magnifying every flaw and evil. The mirror shatters, and its fragments scatter across the world. When a splinter enters someone's eye, they see only ugliness. When a piece pierces someone's heart, that heart becomes ice. A boy named Kay, who has been best friends with a girl named Gerda since childhood, receives both a splinter in his eye and a shard in his heart. Instantly, he changes. He mocks Gerda, says cruel things, finds beauty repulsive, and takes pleasure only in intellectual precision and mathematical perfection. One winter day, the Snow Queen herself appears, and Kay, fascinated by her icy beauty, attaches his sled to her sleigh. She carries him away to her palace in the far north, where everything is ice and snow and geometric perfection, where emotion has no place. Gerda, who loves Kay with the pure devotion of a child's friendship, sets out to find him. Her journey takes her through many strange encounters, each teaching her something about love and persistence. She meets a woman who tries to make her forget Kay by enchanting a garden where it is always summer. She meets a prince and princess who help her on her way. She is captured by robbers, and a robber girl, wild and fierce, becomes her unlikely ally, giving Gerda her reindeer to carry her to the far north. Everywhere Gerda goes, she asks about Kay, and people help her because there is something in her love that moves them, something pure and determined. Finally, she reaches the Snow Queen's palace, and she finds Kay sitting on a frozen lake, trying to arrange pieces of ice into words, trying to spell eternity, for the Snow Queen has promised him the whole world and a pair of skates if he can solve this puzzle. But his heart is frozen, and he cannot feel, cannot remember, cannot recognize Gerda when she rushes to him, weeping. Her hot tears fall on his chest, melting the ice around his heart. She sings the hymn they used to sing together as children, and the splinter of glass falls from his eye. Kay remembers, and he weeps, and his tears wash out the remaining fragment from his eye. They journey home together, and as they pass through the places Gerda visited on her quest, they find that time has passed differently for them. They are no longer children but young adults, and yet Gerda's pure love has not changed, and Kay's gratitude is profound. The story ends with them sitting together, now grown, while someone reads from the Gospel about how one must become like a child to enter the kingdom of heaven. Andersen saw this story as being about the power of innocent love to overcome the coldest intellectualism, about the warmth of faith melting the ice of rationalism, about persistence in the face of impossible odds. The Snow Queen herself is barely present in the tale, more a force of nature than a character, representing the cold beauty of a world without feeling, the seductive appeal of pure reason, untempered by love. When Disney created Frozen, they kept the ice and the Queen, but changed nearly everything else, creating a story about sisterly love and acceptance rather than Andersen's tale of a faithful girl's quest to save her friend from emotional death. The difference reveals how uncomfortable modern audiences are with Andersen's themes. His insistence that Christian faith and childlike love are the only remedies for a cold world. His suggestion that growing up means losing something precious that only suffering and devotion can restore. The Little Match Girl, published in 1845 as Den Lille Pidge Meds Foul Stick-On, is perhaps Andersen's most heartbreaking tale, and it has never been adapted by Disney, for it offers no possibility of a happy ending, no rescue, no redemption in this world. A poor little girl walks through the snowy streets on New Year's Eve, trying to sell matches, for if she returns home without having sold any or earned any money, her father will beat her. She is barefoot, for she lost her slippers, shoes far too large for her that had belonged to her mother. She is freezing, but she dare not go home. As the evening darkens and the snow falls harder, she huddles in a corner between two houses, trying to get warm. She knows that lighting one of the matches would bring a moment of warmth, but she cannot, for the matches are meant to be sold, and each one lit is money lost. Finally, she can bear the cold no longer, and she strikes one match. In the light of that flame, she sees a vision, a great iron stove, warm and beautiful, and she stretches out her hands to it. But the match burns out, and the stove disappears, and she is cold again in the snow. She lights another match, and this time she sees through the wall beside her, into a room where a table is set for a feast. A roasted goose with apples and prunes, and the goose, still on its platter, waddles toward her, but the match goes out, and the vision vanishes. She lights another, and she sees a Christmas tree, tall and beautiful, covered with candles and decorations, more beautiful than any she has glimpsed through rich people's windows. The match dies, and the tree fades. She lights another, and in this flame, she sees her grandmother, the only person who ever loved her, who is now dead. The girl cries out, afraid her grandmother will disappear like the stove, and the feast, and the tree, and so she lights all the remaining matches together, creating a blaze of light. In this brilliance, her grandmother appears fully, smiling, radiant, and she reaches out her arms. The grandmother takes the little girl in her embrace, and they rise together, up and up, beyond cold and hunger and fear, to where there is no cold at all. In the morning, people find the little girl's body in the corner between the houses, frozen to death, surrounded by burnt matches. They say what a shame it is, how she must have been trying to warm herself, but they do not know that she died in her grandmother's arms, that she saw beautiful things in her final moments, that she is now beyond all suffering. Andersen wrote this story after reading about a poor child found frozen in Copenhagen, and he wove into it memories of his own childhood poverty, his own mother who made matches to sell, his own experiences of cold and hunger. The tale is unbearably sad, and yet Andersen meant it as a story of hope, for he believed the girl's death was not an ending but a beginning, that she had escaped a cruel world for something better. Modern readers often find this interpretation troubling, for it seems to romanticize the death of a child, to suggest that dying is preferable to living in poverty. But Andersen, writing in 1845, lived in a world where child death was common, where the poor froze in the streets, where the gap between rich and poor was vast and seemingly His faith told him that suffering on earth would be rewarded in heaven, and so he gave the little match girl visions of beauty before her death, a loving embrace at the end, and the promise of eternal warmth. The story is an indictment of a society that lets children freeze, even as it wraps that indictment in Christian consolation. It is angry and heartbroken, and yet still believes in divine mercy. And this combination of social criticism and religious faith was characteristic of Andersen's work. Thumbelina, published in 1835 as Tomley's, tells the story of a tiny girl born from a barleycorn, no bigger than a thumb. She is beautiful and perfect in miniature, and she sleeps in a walnut shell with a violet petal for a mattress and a rose petal for a blanket. But one night, an old toad sees her through the window and decides Thumbelina would make a perfect wife for her son. The toad steals the sleeping girl and places her on a lily pad in the middle of a stream, intending to keep her there until the wedding arrangements are made. Fish, taking pity on Thumbelina, gnaw through the lily pad's stem, and she floats away, eventually being carried to distant waters. A beetle finds her and is charmed by her, taking her to his tree, but his friends mock her for having only 2 legs instead of 6, and he, caring more for their opinion than for Thumbelina herself, abandons her in the forest. She lives alone through the summer, weaving herself a bed from grass and sheltering under a large leaf, eating nectar from flowers and drinking dew. But when winter comes, she nearly dies from cold and hunger, until a field mouse takes her in, offering shelter in exchange for housekeeping and storytelling. The field mouse has a neighbor, a wealthy mole who lives in elegant underground tunnels and has never seen the sun. The mole decides he wants to marry Thumbelina, though she finds him boring and is horrified by the idea of living forever underground, never seeing the sky or flowers again. While walking through the mole's tunnels one day, Thumbelina finds a swallow who has collapsed there, nearly frozen, and she nurses him back to health, visiting him secretly through the winter, bringing him water and seeds. When spring comes, the swallow recovers and offers to take Thumbelina away, but she feels obligated to stay with the field mouse who saved her life. The wedding to the mole is arranged, and Thumbelina is heartbroken, knowing that in 4 seasons she will go underground forever. On the last day before the wedding, she goes outside to say goodbye to the sun, and the swallow appears, returned from his winter migration. He begs her to come with him, to leave this life of obligation and sadness, and finally, she agrees. She climbs onto his back, and they fly away, far away to warm lands, to a place where flowers bloom year-round, and the sun is always gentle. The swallow brings her to a ruined marble palace overgrown with vines, and there Thumbelina meets the flower fairies, tiny people like herself, each living in a flower. Their prince sees her and falls in love instantly, offering her his crown and his name. Unlike the toad's son or the beetle or the mole, he does not try to change her or keep her trapped. He asks if she will marry him, and when she agrees, all the flowers open and offer her gifts, wings made of gossamer, so she can fly from flower to flower. She becomes their queen, and the swallow, watching, is happy for her, though he loves her too and will carry the memory of her forever. He returns north when summer ends, and in Denmark, he sings his songs. And that is how Andersen claims to know Thumbelina's story, for the swallow told him. The tale is gentler than many of Andersen's, with a happy ending, but it still contains his characteristic themes: suffering and isolation, the cruelty of those who cannot appreciate difference, the long wait for belonging, and the idea that true love means freedom, not possession. Thumbelina endures much before finding her place among the flowers, and even her happy ending is tinged with the sadness of the swallow's unrequited love, a reminder that not every story ends happily for everyone, that someone is always left behind. The Ugly Duckling, published in 1843, is Andersen's most autobiographical tale, reflecting his own experiences of being mocked and rejected before finally finding acceptance. A duckling hatches in a farmyard, and from the beginning, he is different, larger and grayer than his siblings, and the other animals find him ugly and strange. His own mother is ashamed of him, the other ducks peck him, the chickens mock him, even the girl who feeds the poultry kicks him. He runs away, but the wild ducks reject him too, and geese laugh at him before being shot by hunters. He finds temporary shelter with an old woman, but her cat and hen make his life miserable, insisting that because he cannot purr or lay eggs, he is worthless. He leaves again, wandering through autumn and into winter, and one evening he sees beautiful white swans flying overhead, and something in him responds to their beauty with an ache he cannot name. Winter is harsh, and the duckling nearly freezes in the ice of a pond before a farmer rescues him. But the farmer's children frighten him, and he flees again, somehow surviving until spring returns. As the weather warms, he finds himself by a lake, and he sees swans gliding on the water. He expects them to attack him, to drive him away as everyone else has, and he bows his head, waiting for their blows. But when he looks at his reflection, he sees that he is no longer grey and awkward. He has become a swan, beautiful and graceful, one of the very creatures he admired from afar. The other swans welcome him. Children on the shore exclaim at how beautiful the new swan is, the most beautiful of all, and the duckling, who is a duckling no longer, feels happiness he has never known. But Andersen does not let the story end in simple triumph. The swan remembers all the suffering he endured, all the mockery and rejection and loneliness, and he thinks that he could never have appreciated this happiness if he had not first known profound sorrow. The tale is clearly Andersen's own story. He who was poor and strange-looking and socially awkward, mocked in his youth, who became one of the most celebrated writers in Europe, honored by kings and read by millions. But the sorrow of those early years never left him, and his tales return again and again to themes of outsiders seeking belonging, of suffering as the price of transformation, of beauty emerging from the most unlikely places. The Ugly Duckling suggests that some of us are born into the wrong families, the wrong places, that we spend years being judged by standards that do not apply to us, and that recognition, when it comes, is both joyful and sad, for it cannot erase the years of pain, only make them meaningful in retrospect. Andersen's tales, taken together, paint a picture of a world where beauty and suffering are inseparable, where transformation is possible but always costly, where love often goes unrewarded in this life, and where faith in something beyond this world offers the only true consolation. His stories are melancholic in a way that folktales rarely are. For folktales come from communal traditions where suffering is acknowledged but rarely dwelt upon, where happy endings restore order, where the focus is on survival and cleverness rather than emotional truth. Andersen wrote from the inside of his own loneliness, his own sense of not belonging, his own conviction that he was different from others, in ways both blessed and cursed. His Little Mermaid gives up everything for love and receives only the possibility of a soul. His match girl dies in the snow, but is embraced by her grandmother's ghost. His Ugly Duckling finds his true nature, but cannot forget the pain of being despised. These are not stories that comfort easily or promise that love conquers all. They are stories that acknowledge how hard life is, how cruel people can be, how often we love without being loved in return, how transformation requires us to let go of everything we have known. They are also stories that insist suffering can be redemptive, that faith offers hope, that beauty exists even in sorrow, and that the soul, if we believe in such a thing, is shaped by the fires through which it passes. When Disney approached these stories, they faced an impossible task: how to adapt Andersen's tragic, faith-inflected, deeply personal tales into family entertainment. The Little Mermaid became a story of teenage rebellion rewarded with true love. The Snow Queen became Frozen, with its themes of sisterhood and self-acceptance, The Ugly Duckling has been adapted many times as a simple tale of finding where you belong. But something essential is always lost in these adaptations: the sense that suffering might not lead to earthly happiness, the possibility that sacrifice might be complete, the understanding that some of us are marked by sorrow in ways that shape our entire lives. Andersen would not have begrudged these happier versions. He wanted his stories to be read, to touch hearts, and perhaps he would have understood that different ages need different kinds of tales. But the originals remain, waiting in libraries and old translations, ready to remind us that fairy tales were not always about happy endings, that some of the most beautiful stories are the saddest ones, and that acknowledging sorrow is sometimes more honest than promising joy. Charles Perrault published his Histoire aux contes du temps passé in 1697, more than a century before the Brothers Grimm began their work, and his tales reflect the sophisticated, sometimes cynical atmosphere of Louis XIV's French court. Perrault was not collecting peasant folklore, but rather crafting literary fairy tales for an aristocratic audience, adults who appreciated wit, irony, and moral ambiguity. His stories were elegant and polished, written in a style that acknowledged their artificiality, even as they drew on folk traditions. Most distinctively, Perrault ended each tale with a moralite, an explicit moral poem that explained what lesson readers should draw from the story, though these morals were often more complex or ironic than they first appeared. His versions of Sleeping Beauty, Cinderella, and Little Red Riding Hood became foundational texts that later writers, including the Grimms, would adapt and change. But Perrault's originals contained elements that revealed a darker, more complicated worldview than the later versions would suggest. His tales acknowledged that beauty could be dangerous, that parents might fail their children, that happy endings might be followed by new troubles, and that the world was full of predators who wore charming masks. Perrault's version of Sleeping Beauty, La Belle au Bois dormant, begins much as later versions do, with a princess cursed to prick her finger on a spindle and fall into a death-like sleep, with a prince who awakens her with a kiss after 100 years. But Perrault's story does not end with their wedding. Instead, it continues for many more pages, revealing that the prince cannot immediately marry the princess because his mother is an ogress, a creature who eats human flesh and must carefully control her appetites to live among humans. The prince keeps his marriage secret for 2 years, visiting his wife and their 2 children, dawn and day, in a hidden house in the forest, while telling his mother he is hunting. When his father, the king, dies and the prince must take the throne, he finally brings his wife and children to court. But he is soon called away to war, and he leaves his family in his mother's care, not realizing the danger. The ogress queen mother immediately orders her steward to kill little Dawn and serve her for dinner with a special sauce. The steward cannot bring himself to murder the child, so he hides her and serves a lamb instead, and the ogress finds the meal delicious, praising the sauce. A week later, the ogress demands that little Day be killed and served to her in the same manner, and again the steward substitutes an animal, this time a young goat. The ogress is satisfied, complimenting the tenderness of the meat. Then she demands that the young queen herself be killed and cooked, and the steward, who has been hiding the family in his own quarters, finally serves a deer instead. But the ogress begins to suspect deception when she hears the voices of children playing, and in a rage, she discovers the steward's trick. She orders a huge vat to be placed in the courtyard, filled with toads, vipers, and other venomous creatures, and commands that the queen, the 2 children, the steward, his wife, and their servant all be thrown in to die horribly. They are brought out, the executioners are ready, and the moment of death approaches when suddenly the king returns from war. The ogress, seeing herself discovered, throws herself into the vat of poisoned creatures and is consumed by them. The king grieves for his mother despite her cruelty, and the story ends with the family safe at last. Perrault's moral poem suggests that while patience in waiting for a good marriage is virtuous, passionate haste is understandable, and that sometimes even fairy tale endings require surviving additional trials before true happiness can be secured. This extension of Sleeping Beauty's story reveals something important about Perrault's understanding of narrative and life. The wedding is not the end, because marriage is not the end of challenges. The young couple must navigate family relationships, must protect their children from danger, must survive even when evil comes from within their own household. The ogress mother-in-law represents anxieties about in-laws and family acceptance, about the difficulty of merging different bloodlines, about the possibility that those who should protect might instead pose the greatest threat. The steward's role is also significant, for he represents the good servant who risks everything to protect the innocent, who must be clever and resourceful to outwit his mistress without openly defying her. The story acknowledges class distinctions, the power of the aristocracy, but also suggests that virtue can exist across class lines, that a steward might be more honorable than a queen. When Disney and others adapted Sleeping Beauty, they ended the story at the wedding, finding the ogress episode too dark, too complicated, too disturbing for children's entertainment. But in removing it, they lost Perrault's more nuanced understanding that fairy tale happiness must be defended, that danger can come from unexpected sources, and that rescue is sometimes necessary even after the prince has already saved the princess. Perrault's Le Petit Chaperon Rouge, or Little Red Riding Hood, is famous for its dark ending, so different from the Grimm version that would follow more than a century later. In Perrault's telling, the little girl is sent through the forest to visit her sick grandmother, carrying cakes and butter. A wolf sees her and wants to eat her immediately, but dares not because woodcutters are working nearby. So he asks where she is going, and she innocently tells him. The wolf suggests she pick some flowers for her grandmother and enjoy the beautiful forest. And while she does this, he races ahead to grandmother's house. He knocks, imitates the little girl's voice, is let in, and devours the old woman in seconds. Then he puts on her nightgown and cap and gets into bed, waiting. When Little Red Riding Hood arrives, she notices how strange her grandmother looks, asking the famous questions about big arms, big ears, big eyes, big teeth. The wolf's answers grow more ominous with each exchange, until finally he declares that his big teeth are for eating her, and he leaps from the bed and devours the child. And that is where Perrault's story ends. There is no huntsman, no rescue, no stones in the wolf's belly. The wolf wins. The little girl dies. The story concludes with Perrault's moral poem, which makes explicit what is already clear, that young ladies, especially pretty ones, should not listen to strangers, for wolves come in many forms, and the most dangerous are those who are gentle, obliging, and sweet. The moral poem specifically warns about wolves who follow young ladies into their homes and into their beds, making clear that Perrault is not talking only about animals in the forest, but about male predators who seduce innocent girls. His story is a warning about sexual danger, about how predators gain trust before revealing their true nature, about how being too trusting, too willing to share information, too easily distracted from the path can lead to disaster. The Red Hood itself, in Perrault's time, might have symbolized the transition into womanhood, the beginning of sexual maturity that makes a girl visible to predators. By ending the story with the girl's death, Perrault refuses to soften the warning or suggest that mistakes can always be fixed. This is harsh teaching, but he believed it necessary in a world where real wolves, human ones, did indeed prey on the innocent. When the Grimm brothers retold this tale, they added the huntsman who cuts open the wolf and rescues both grandmother and child, filling the beast with stones as punishment. Their version allowed for redemption and rescue, suggesting that help might come even when all seems lost. But Perrault's original offers no such comfort. It stands as a stark reminder that some mistakes are final, that trust given to the wrong person can lead to irreversible harm, and that the world contains genuine danger that no fairy tale magic can undo. Perrault's version of Cinderella, Cendrillon, shares many elements with the Grimm's Aschenputtel, but differs in crucial ways that reveal Perrault's more forgiving worldview. In his telling, Cinderella has a fairy godmother rather than a magical tree, and this godmother appears when Cinderella is weeping in the garden, unable to go to the ball. With a wave of her wand, the godmother transforms a pumpkin into a golden coach, mice into horses, a rat into a coachman, and lizards into footmen, creating the magnificent outfit that will allow Cinderella to attend the ball. The godmother warns that all the magic will end at midnight, and Cinderella must return before then or risk being discovered in her rags. At the ball, the prince is enchanted by her beauty, and even Cinderella's stepsisters do not recognize her. She leaves before midnight, returning to her ashes, but the prince is smitten. The next night, the same magic allows her to attend again, but this time she is so happy she forgets to watch the clock. When it begins to strike midnight, she flees in panic, losing one of her glass slippers on the palace steps. The prince searches the kingdom for the woman whose foot fits the slipper, and when it fits Cinderella, her stepsisters are amazed and horrified. But here, Perrault's version diverges most dramatically from the Grimm telling. Cinderella, instead of allowing her stepsisters to suffer punishment, produces the matching slipper from her pocket, proving her identity. Then, showing mercy that the Grimm version never imagines, Cinderella forgives forgives her stepsisters completely. She embraces them, tells them she forgives all their cruelty, and she arranges for both of them to marry great lords at court. The story ends with everyone reconciled, with forgiveness rather than revenge, with Cinderella's kindness extending even to those who tormented her. Perrault's moral poem emphasizes that while beauty is valuable, kindness and grace are more valuable still, and that having a godmother who can work magic is helpful, but being clever enough to make use of such help is essential. This ending reveals Perrault's courtly values, where reconciliation and social harmony mattered, where revenge was seen as beneath the truly noble, where showing mercy to those who wronged you demonstrated superior virtue. It stands in stark contrast to the Grimm version, where the stepsisters mutilate themselves and have their eyes pecked out, where justice is harsh and physical. Neither ending is necessarily better, but they reflect profoundly different worldviews, one that values forgiveness and social order, another that values proportional punishment and the satisfaction of seeing wickedness punished. Perrault also wrote La Barbe, Blue, or Bluebeard, a tale so dark that Disney has never attempted to adapt it, for it offers no possibility of sanitization. Bluebeard is a wealthy man whose beard is an unusual blue color, and he has been married several times, though no one knows what became of his previous wives. He courts a young woman from a neighboring family, and despite her unease about his strange beard and mysterious past, she is persuaded by his wealth and charm to marry him. Shortly after the wedding, Bluebeard tells his new wife that he must travel on business. He gives her the keys to all the rooms in his castle, telling her she may go anywhere except one particular room, which he forbids her to enter on pain of his terrible anger. He leaves, and his wife's curiosity grows unbearable. She tries to distract herself by inviting her friends to visit, showing them the magnificent rooms and treasures, but the forbidden door calls to her. Finally, she takes the key, her hand trembling, and unlocks the forbidden chamber. Inside, she finds the bodies of all Bluebeard's previous wives, hanging on the walls, their throats cut, blood pooled on the floor. She drops the key in horror, and when she picks it up, she sees it is stained with blood that will not wash away, no matter what she does. Bluebeard returns earlier than expected, and immediately asks for the keys. When he sees the blood on the key to the forbidden room, he knows she has disobeyed. He tells her coldly that she will join the other wives hanging in that chamber, and though she begs for time to pray, he allows her only 15 minutes. She calls to her sister Anne to watch from the tower for their brothers, who are supposed to visit that day. Bluebeard grows impatient, dragging his wife by her hair toward the forbidden room, raising his sword to strike off her head, while she keeps calling to Sister Anne, asking if she sees anyone coming. At the last possible moment, as Bluebeard's sword is raised, the brothers arrive and run him through with their swords, killing him before he can murder his wife. The young woman inherits all Bluebeard's wealth, uses it to arrange good marriages for her sister and herself, and tries to forget the horror of what she saw in that forbidden room. Perrault's moral suggests that curiosity can be dangerous, especially for women, though he acknowledges that the story takes place in the past, and that husbands are no longer quite so terrible. The tale is about domestic violence, about the danger of marrying for wealth rather than love, about how predators can hide behind respectable facades, and about the fatal consequences of curiosity and disobedience in a world where women had little power. Giambattista Bosel published his Lo Conto degli Conti, also known as the Pentamerone, in 1634, making it one of the earliest written collections of fairy tales in Europe, predating Perrault by more than 60 years, and the Grimms by nearly 2 centuries. Bosel wrote in Neapolitan dialect, and his tales were earthy, violent, and unapologetically adult, meant for courtly entertainment rather than children's education. His version of Sleeping Beauty, called Sol, Luna, Italia Sun, Moon, and Talia, contains elements so disturbing that later writers completely transformed the story. In Basil's telling, a king's daughter named Talia is cursed by wise men who predict she will be endangered by a splinter of flax. Her father, trying to prevent this, forbids all flax and hemp in his kingdom. But when Talia is grown, she sees an old woman spinning, and curious, takes the distaff to try it herself. A splinter goes under her fingernail, and she falls down as if dead. Her father, overcome with grief and unable to bury his beloved daughter, places her on a velvet throne in one of his hunting lodges, locks the door, and abandons the estate forever, leaving Talia sitting there as if merely sleeping. Years later, another king is hunting in the forest and follows his falcon into the abandoned lodge. He finds the door locked, climbs through a window, and discovers Talia sitting on her throne, still appearing to sleep, still beautiful. Basil's text becomes difficult here, for it describes the king as being overcome by Talia's beauty, and what happens next is deeply troubling. The king, according to Basil's narrative, takes advantage of Talia's sleeping state, and then he leaves, returning to his own kingdom and his own wife, eventually forgetting about the incident. Talia, still sleeping, eventually gives birth to twins, a boy and a girl, who are cared for by fairies that Basil mentions but does not explain. One of the babies, searching for milk, sucks on Talia's finger and draws out the splinter of flax. Talia wakes up, discovers she has somehow given birth while sleeping, and names the twins Sun and Moon. She lives in the lodge with her children, provided for by the mysterious fairies, not understanding what has happened to her, but loving her children nonetheless. Meanwhile, the king remembers the beautiful sleeping woman and returns to the lodge, where he is amazed to find Talia awake with 2 children. He explains who he is, and they realize he is the father. They begin a relationship, though he is still married to someone else. The king's wife discovers the affair and, in her rage, orders her servants to kidnap the twins and bring them to her. She commands her cook to kill the children and serve them to the king for dinner, intending him to unknowingly consume his own offspring. But the cook, moved by pity, hides the children and serves goat meat instead. The queen then sends for Talia herself, planning to throw her into a fire. As Talia is brought to the palace and the fire is prepared, she begs to be allowed to remove her fine clothes first, and with each garment she removes, she screams, hoping someone will hear and help. The king hears her cries and rushes to investigate. He discovers his wife's plot, learns that the cook saved his children, and in his fury, he has his wife thrown into the flames meant for Talia. He also orders the same fate for those who helped the queen, though he spares the cook who saved his children, rewarding him instead. The king then marries Talia, and they live with their twins, Sun and Moon, in happiness. Basil ends with a proverb suggesting that those who are fortunate will find luck even while sleeping. This shocking tale represents the furthest extreme of the Sleeping Beauty story, containing elements that modern audiences find deeply troubling and that later writers systematically removed or transformed. When Perrault adapted this story 60 years later, he removed the most disturbing elements, having the prince wake the princess with a kiss rather than through the circumstances Basil described. The Grimms, following Perrault, kept this change, but all 3 versions include the dangerous mother-in-law or mother figure who threatens the new family, suggesting that this element was somehow important to the tale's meaning. The progression from Basil to Perrault to Grimm to Disney shows a steady process of sanitization, of removing violence, of making the princess more active in her own rescue, of transforming a dark tale of violation and revenge into a story about true love's kiss. Each version reflects its era's values and its understanding of what stories should do. Basil's courtly audience in 17th century Naples apparently accepted or even expected tales of sexual violence, cannibalistic mothers-in-law, and fiery revenge. Perrault's French court preferred more elegance and less explicit violence. The Grimms wanted moral instruction. Disney wanted family entertainment. The distance from Basil's Talia to Disney's Aurora measures not just centuries, but fundamental shifts in how we understand consent, violence, justice, and the purpose of storytelling itself. Basil's version of Cinderella, called La Gatta Cenerentola, the Cat's Cinderella, presents the heroine as far more morally complex than any later adaptation would dare. In this telling, Zezola lives with her father and a cruel stepmother who favors her own 6 daughters. Zezola's governess, Carmesina, sympathizes with the girl and suggests a shocking solution. She tells Zezola that if her father were to marry someone else, someone kinder, her life would improve. She hints that if the cruel stepmother were to die, and if Zezola's father were then to marry Carmesina herself, everything would be better. Zezola, desperate to escape her suffering, takes this suggestion to its logical conclusion. When her stepmother leans into a large chest to get some clothes, Zezola slams the lid down on her neck with such force that it breaks, killing her stepmother instantly. Zezola's father believes it was an accident, and after a period of mourning, Zezola convinces him to marry Carmesina, believing her life will now improve. But Carmesina, once she becomes the new stepmother, reveals her true nature. She has 6 daughters of her own, whom she brings into the household, and she begins to treat Zezola worse than the first stepmother ever did, forcing her to work in the kitchen, sleep by the cinders, and live as a servant to her stepsisters. The story then follows a more familiar pattern, with Zezola receiving magical help. attending royal festivities, losing a slipper, and eventually marrying the prince. But Bosel's version never lets us forget that Zezola is not an innocent victim but someone who committed murder to improve her circumstances, and found that violence solved nothing, that replacing one cruel stepmother with another only taught her that the problem was not the individual but the situation itself. This moral complexity, this suggestion that the heroine is capable of terrible actions, makes the story profoundly different from any other Cinderella variant. Perrault's Cendrillon is kind and forgiving. Grimm's Aschenputtel is patient and pious. Disney's Cinderella is relentlessly optimistic and gentle. But Basil's Zezola is a girl who killed her stepmother and lived to regret it, not because she was punished, but because it did not help. Because violence created new problems instead of solving old ones. The tale seems to suggest that trying to control one's fate through violence is futile, that patience or luck or magic might eventually bring rescue, but that taking matters into one's own hands through murder will only lead to deeper suffering. It is a strange moral for a fairy tale, neither fully condemning nor approving Zazola's action, simply showing its futility and the irony of her situation. Carlo Collodi began serializing Le Avventure di Pinocchio in an Italian children's newspaper in 1881, writing it chapter by chapter without knowing where the story would end. The tale that emerged was far darker than the Disney film would suggest, reflecting the harsh realities of 19th century Italian childhood, where poverty was common, education was rare, and children faced genuine dangers. Collodi's Pinocchio is not a cute wooden boy longing to be real, but a selfish, impulsive, often cruel puppet who must learn through terrible suffering what it means to be good. The story begins when a carpenter named Master Cherry finds a piece of wood that can talk. Frightened, he gives it to his friend Geppetto, who carves it into a puppet to make his living as a traveling puppeteer. But before Geppetto even finishes carving, the puppet is making trouble, kicking him, mocking him, running away. Pinocchio is born bad, or at least born wild, with no understanding of consequences, or gratitude, or basic decency. From his first moments, he causes suffering to Geppetto, who loves him despite everything, who sacrifices for him, who is repeatedly disappointed by him, but never stops hoping he will improve. The talking cricket appears in the 4th chapter, not as the charming companion of the Disney film, but as a voice of conscience that Pinocchio finds unbearably annoying. The cricket has lived in Geppetto's house for over 100 years, and when Pinocchio declares his intention to run away, to avoid school, to live a life of pleasure, the cricket tries to warn him. He tells Pinocchio that boys who disobey their parents and run away from home always come to grief, that they will regret it sooner or later. Pinocchio, enraged by this moralizing, picks up a wooden hammer and throws it at the cricket with all his strength. The hammer strikes the cricket dead, killing him instantly, and Pinocchio shows no remorse, only annoyance that the cricket dared to lecture him. The cricket's death is shocking, a moment of genuine violence from the protagonist, and Collodi meant it to shock his young readers, to show them where unchecked impulse and disrespect for wisdom leads. Later in the story, the cricket returns as a ghost, still trying to guide Pinocchio, still being ignored. A persistent conscience that refuses to stay dead, even when murdered. This transformation from physical being to ghostly advisor makes the cricket even more unsettling. A reminder that conscience cannot be killed, that guilt will haunt those who refuse to listen to wisdom. The most famous episode of the original story, the one that Collodi intended as the ending before his readers demanded more, occurs when Pinocchio encounters the fox and the cat, two con artists who pretend to be disabled and trick Pinocchio into trying to plant his gold coins in a field of miracles where they claim money trees will grow. When Pinocchio goes to dig up his coins after they supposedly have grown, he finds nothing, for the fox and cat have stolen them. They later ambushed him on the road, disguised as murderers in flour sacks, demanding his money. When Pinocchio hides the last coins in his mouth, they try to force his mouth open. He bites off the cat's paw in self-defense, though he does not know it is the cat, and runs for his life. The assassins chase him through the night, and Pinocchio runs until he can run no more. They catch him in the forest, and because he still will not give up the coins, they hang him from a great oak tree, leaving him suspended there to die. Collodi ends the chapter with Pinocchio hanging lifeless, swaying in the wind, and the words, "And there he hung, and there he hung, and there he hung." This was meant to be the end of the story, the ultimate consequence of disobedience, greed, and foolishness, a warning so stark that it could not be ignored. But the readers, children and adults alike, protested so strongly that Collodi had to continue the story. He brought Pinocchio back to life through the intervention of the Blue Fairy, who appears not as a kindly godmother, but as a mysterious child with blue hair who has been dead and lives in a house in the forest, a strange and unsettling figure. She sends a falcon to cut Pinocchio down and summons doctors to examine him. 3 doctors who are a crow, an owl, and a cricket, the same cricket Pinocchio killed, now returned in a new form. The doctors disagree about whether Pinocchio is alive or dead, and finally, the fairy gives him bitter medicine that saves him. Throughout his recovery, Pinocchio continues to lie, telling elaborate falsehoods about what happened, and each time he lies, his nose grows longer, becoming so long that he cannot turn around in the room, cannot fit through the door, becomes trapped by his own dishonesty, made visible. This is the famous nose-growing episode, but in Collodi's version, it is more disturbing than Disney's playful treatment, for the nose grows to enormous length, several feet long, so large that it immobilizes Pinocchio completely, so heavy that he cannot hold up his head, and the fairy lets him suffer like this for hours before finally calling in woodpeckers to peck the nose back to normal size. The punishment is physical, prolonged, and meant to be genuinely frightening. Pinocchio's adventures continue through many chapters of suffering and poor choices. He trusts the fox and cat again despite everything. He is nearly fried in a pan by a fisherman who mistakes him for a fish puppet. He visits Toyland, a place where boys never study and play all day, and slowly transforms into a donkey. His ears growing long and furry, his body changing, his voice becoming a bray. He is sold to a circus and forced to perform, beaten when he cannot jump through hoops, and when he becomes lame from injury. He is sold again to someone who plans to drown him and use his skin to make a drum. He is thrown into the sea with a stone tied round his neck, and the fish eat away his donkey exterior, revealing the wooden puppet underneath. He escapes and is swallowed by an enormous shark, not a whale as Disney would later change it, inside which he finds Geppetto, who has been living in the shark's stomach for 2 years, surviving on food from a ship the shark swallowed. Father and son escape together, and Pinocchio finally begins to change, to work, to study, to care for the aging Geppetto, who is too weak to work. He takes multiple jobs, waking before dawn to work in a garden, turning a water wheel for a farmer, learning to weave baskets, doing everything he can to earn money for food and medicine for his father. This transformation, earned through suffering and labor, through seeing what his selfishness has cost those who love him, is what finally makes Pinocchio worthy of becoming real. One morning, he wakes to find himself changed, no longer a puppet, but a real boy, flesh and blood, while the old puppet body lies nearby like a discarded shell. Geppetto is well again. Their poverty is ended through Pinocchio's honest work, and the Blue Fairy has rewarded the boy's transformation. Pinocchio looks at his former wooden self and remarks on what a ridiculous puppet he was. How foolish, and he is glad to be rid of that identity. Collodi's moral is clear and consistent throughout the 2-year serialization. Children must learn obedience, hard work, honesty, and self-sacrifice, and only through suffering the consequences of their bad choices will they learn these lessons. The story is harsh because Collodi believed children needed harsh lessons, that the world was unforgiving, that poverty and lack of education would trap them in lives of suffering, and that only through discipline and virtue could they hope to improve their circumstances. The cricket's murder, the hanging, the transformation into a donkey, the years in the shark's belly, all of it was meant to terrify children into good behavior, to show them that the path of pleasure and disobedience leads only to degradation and suffering. When Disney adapted Pinocchio in 1940, they softened almost everything. The cricket becomes Jiminy, a charming companion rather than a murdered voice of conscience, returned as a ghost. The hanging is removed entirely. The transformation into a donkey is scary, but ends much more quickly and less completely. The story becomes about a wooden boy who wants to be real and learns to be brave, truthful, and unselfish through adventures that, while containing dark elements, never descend into the sustained suffering and horror of Collodi's original. Disney's Pinocchio is fundamentally innocent, led astray by bad companions but good at heart. Collodi's Pinocchio is fundamentally selfish and must have that selfishness burned away through terrible experience. Disney's Geppetto is rescued by Pinocchio's heroism. Collodi's Geppetto suffers for years because of Pinocchio's selfishness, and is only finally helped when Pinocchio grows up enough to work and sacrifice. The 2 versions share a title and a wooden boy who becomes real, but they teach profoundly different lessons about childhood, morality, and the relationship between suffering and growth. Collodi's harsh 19th century morality his belief that children were naturally selfish and needed to be frightened into goodness has fallen out of favor, but his original story remains as a document of how fairy tales and children's literature once served as tools of discipline and social control, using fear and suffering as teaching methods, promising transformation only to those who endured enough pain to deserve it. The myths of ancient Greece were not fairy tales but religious narratives, stories that explained the nature of the gods and the world, that taught through the examples of heroes and monsters, that carried the weight of sacred truth for those who told them. When Disney adapted the story of Hercules in 1997, they drew on these ancient myths but transformed them so completely that almost nothing of the original remained except the name and the idea of heroic labors. The Greek hero, Heracles, whose name the Romans changed to Hercules, appears in multiple ancient sources, including the library of Apollodorus, the plays of Euripides, and Ovid's Metamorphoses. And while these sources sometimes contradict each other in details, they agree on the essential outline of his story. He was not the son of Zeus and Hera, living a happy immortal life, as Disney portrayed. He was the illegitimate son of Zeus and a mortal woman named Alcmene, and Hera, Zeus's wife, hated him from the moment of his birth. Her hatred would shape his entire life, driving him to madness, causing him to commit terrible acts, and ultimately leading to his death, and only then to his ascension to Olympus. The story of Hercules is not about a hero proving himself worthy, but about a man trying to atone for crimes committed in madness, about suffering that cannot be undone, about strength that cannot protect against the cruelty of the gods. Hercules was born because Zeus disguised himself as Alcmene's husband, Amphitryon, and visited her while her real husband was away at war. When Alcmene gave birth to twins, one was Hercules, son of Zeus, and the other was Iphicul's son of Hera, enraged by yet another of Zeus's infidelities, sent two enormous serpents to kill the infant Hercules in his cradle. But even as a baby, Hercules possessed supernatural strength. He grabbed the serpents, one in each hand, and strangled them, playing with their bodies afterward, as if they were toys. This early demonstration of his power marked him as special, but it also marked him as a target for Hera's unending hatred. She would torment him throughout his life, not with direct violence, but through madness, through twisting his mind so that his own strength became the instrument of his greatest sorrows. As Hercules grew, he was trained by the greatest teachers, learned to fight and sing and think, and he married a princess named Megara, the daughter of King Creon of Thebes. They had children together, and for a time, Hercules knew happiness and peace, living as a husband and father, his great strength employed in protecting his city and his family. But Hera's patience was long, and her hatred was deep. According to Euripides' play Heracles, she sent madness upon him one day, a divine frenzy that clouded his mind and made him see his wife and children as enemies. In his madness, Hercules killed them all. The ancient sources vary on details. Some say he shot them with arrows, others say he threw them into fire. But all agree that when the madness lifted and Hercules saw what he had done, his grief was absolute. He had killed the people he loved most in the world, had used his great strength against those he was meant to protect, and no amount of heroism could undo this act. He wanted to die himself, to end his own life in despair. But his friend Theseus convinced him that suicide was cowardice, that he must live and seek purification for his crime. Hercules went to the oracle at Delphi seeking guidance, and Apollo's priestess told him he must serve King Eurystheus of Mycenae for 12 years, performing whatever labors the king demanded, and only then might he find redemption and peace. The famous 12 labors of Hercules, the acts that made him the greatest hero of Greek myth, were not tests of worthiness or heroic quests undertaken for glory. They were penance for infanticide and uxoricide. They were punishment for crimes committed in madness. They were the price he had to pay for hope of redemption. The 12 labors themselves were designed to be impossible, for King Eurystheus hated and feared Hercules and hoped each task would result in his death. Hercules had to kill the Nemean lion whose hide could not be pierced by weapons, strangle it with his bare hands and wear its skin as armor. He had to slay the 9-headed Hydra, whose heads multiplied when cut off, burning the stumps with fire to prevent regeneration while his nephew held a torch. He had to capture the golden hind of Artemis, a sacred deer that could run faster than arrows fly, chasing it for an entire year before finally catching it. He had to capture the Erymanthian boar alive, driving it into deep snow until it was exhausted. He had to clean the Augean stables in a single day, stables that housed thousands of cattle and had not been cleaned in 30 years, accomplishing it by diverting to rivers to wash away the filth. He had to drive away the Stymphalian birds with bronze beaks and metallic feathers that could pierce armor, using a rattle given to him by Athena to frighten them into flight so he could shoot them down. He had to capture the Cretan bull that was ravaging the island, wrestling it into submission. He had to steal the man-eating mares of Diomedes, which fed on human flesh, feeding their owner to them before leading them away. He had to obtain the girdle of Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons, which led to a battle where Hercules, deceived by Hera into thinking the Amazons were attacking him, killed Hippolyta and took the belt from her body. He had to capture the cattle of Geryon, a three-bodied giant who lived at the end of the world, killing Geryon and his two-headed dog and herding the cattle all the way back to Greece. He had to steal the golden apples of the Hesperides, which were guarded by a 100-headed dragon and belonged to the gods themselves, getting them with the help of Atlas, who held up the sky. Finally, he had to descend into the underworld and bring back Cerberus, the three-headed dog that guarded the gates of the dead, wrestling the beast into submission and dragging it to the surface before returning it unharmed. Each of these labors took months or years. Each involved traveling to the edges of the known world. Each required not just strength, but cunning, persistence, and the help of gods who pitied him. When Hercules completed all 12 labors, he had served his penance, but his suffering was far from over, for Hera's hatred had not diminished, and the gods did not forget, and the mortal world held new sorrows waiting for him. After completing his labors, Hercules remarried, taking as his second wife Deianira, a princess he won by fighting the river god Achelous. They lived together for years, and Hercules continued to have adventures, but always the shadow of his past crimes followed him. One day, they needed to cross a river, and a centaur named Nessus offered to carry Deianira across while Hercules swam. But once in the middle of the river, Nessus attempted to abduct Deianira to violate her, and Hercules, standing on the far shore, shot the centaur with an arrow dipped in the Hydra's poison. As Nessus died, the poison burning through his body in agony, he enacted a final revenge. He told Deianira to collect his blood, telling her it was a love potion, that if Hercules ever seemed to be losing interest in her, she should put this blood on his clothing, and his love would return. Deianira believed him, and kept the blood in a sealed jar for years. Eventually, Hercules did fall in love with another woman, a princess named Iole, and Deianira, desperate to win back his affection, took out the jar of Nessus's blood. She soaked one of Hercules' favorite tunics in it and sent it to him as a gift. When Hercules put on the tunic, the Hydra's poison that had mixed with Nessus's blood began to burn his skin. The poison was so powerful that it caused unimaginable agony, and when Hercules tried to tear off the tunic, it stuck to his flesh, and pieces of his skin came away with it. The pain was beyond anything even he could endure, beyond the madness Hera had sent, beyond the labors, beyond all his years of suffering. He knew he was dying, and he knew that death would be slow and agonizing. Rather than endure it, he ordered a great funeral pyre to be built on Mount Ota. He climbed onto the pyre, lay down on his lion's skin, and asked for someone to light it. When finally a passing shepherd agreed, the flames rose around Hercules, and he died in the fire, seeking release through self-chosen death. But Zeus, who had watched his son suffer for so many years, who had seen him complete the labors and endure more than any mortal should, finally intervened. He sent down a thunderbolt to take Hercules up to Olympus, and there, in death, Hercules was finally made immortal. He was reconciled with Hera, married the goddess Hebe, and took his place among the gods. But this ascension came only after death, only after a life filled with suffering, only after crimes that could never truly be forgiven, only after he had paid every possible price. The distance between this mythological Hercules and Disney's hero could not be greater. Disney's Hercules is the legitimate son of Zeus and Hera, stolen as a baby and raised mortal, who must prove himself a true hero to regain his place on Olympus. Disney's Megara is a love interest who survives. Disney's Hercules performs labors to become famous, not to atone for murder. The film ends happily with Hercules choosing to remain mortal to be with Meg, giving up divinity for love. But the Greek myths offered no such comfort. Megara and her children died by Hercules' own hand, a crime that no heroism could erase. His second wife inadvertently killed him, believing she was saving their marriage. His divine father let him suffer through decades of torment before finally granting him immortality through death. The myths presented the gods as powerful but capricious, capable of inspiring madness, incapable of, or unwilling to prevent suffering, dispensing justice according to their own incomprehensible logic. Hercules was the greatest of heroes, and yet his life was a tragedy. His strength was both his gift and his curse. His suffering was endless, and only in death did he find peace. The Greeks told these stories not to comfort but to explain the nature of a world where the gods existed and intervened but did not always protect, where fate could be cruel, where even the mightiest could be brought low, and where suffering was simply part of the human and heroic condition, something to be endured rather than escaped. The story of Pocahontas is not a fairy tale or a myth, but a historical tragedy involving a real young girl whose life intersected with English colonization in ways that would be romanticized and distorted for centuries. Pocahontas was born around 1596, the daughter of Powhatan, the paramount chief of a network of tribes in the region the English would call Virginia. Her real name was Amanut, and she was also known as Matoka among her people. Pocahontas was a nickname, likely meaning something like playful one or ill-behaved child, the kind of teasing name a father might give a spirited daughter. When the English established Jamestown in 1607, Pocahontas would have been about 11 years old, a child in a world suddenly invaded by strangers whose presence would destroy the life her people had known. The English colonists wrote about her in their records and letters, but always from their perspective, always filtering her actions through their assumptions and needs, always using her story for their own purposes. We know some facts about her life, dates, and events documented in colonial records, but we can never truly know her thoughts, her feelings, her understanding of what was happening to her. What we do know is that the story told in the Disney film bears almost no resemblance to historical reality. The famous story of Pocahontas saving John Smith's life, the scene that appears in every retelling and became central to the Disney film, is itself questionable. John Smith wrote about this incident, but only years later, and historians debate whether it actually happened or whether Smith invented or misunderstood what occurred. According to Smith's account, written long after the events, he was captured by Powhatan's warriors and brought before the chief. He was forced to lay his head on a stone, and warriors stood ready with clubs to beat him to death. When Pocahontas, the chief's beloved daughter, threw herself over Smith's body, placing her own head upon his, begging her father to spare the Englishman's life, Powhatan agreed, releasing Smith and adopting him in some form. Modern historians suggest several possibilities about this event, if it happened at all. It may have been a ritual adoption ceremony that Smith misinterpreted as a near execution. It may have been a test or a performance. Or it may have been a story Smith invented to make himself seem more important and to create a narrative of the noble savage princess who recognized English superiority and chose to help them. What is certain is that Pocahontas was a child, perhaps 11 years old, and Smith was a grown man of 27. Any modern romanticization of their relationship is deeply inappropriate and historically inaccurate. For several years after the Jamestown settlement, Pocahontas served as an intermediary between her father's people and the English, bringing food and messages, learning some English, observing the colonists. But in 1613, when she was about 17 years old, she was captured by the English Captain Samuel Argall. Learning that Pocahontas was visiting a neighboring tribe, conspired with that tribe's chief to lure her onto his ship and then refused to release her, taking her to Jamestown as a hostage. The English held her for over a year, using her as leverage in negotiations with her father, demanding the return of English prisoners and stolen weapons. During her captivity, she was kept at a settlement called Henricus, where she was taught English customs, given English clothing, and instructed in Christianity. The records say she converted willingly and took the baptismal name Rebecca, but we cannot know how much choice she truly had in any of this. She was a prisoner, far from her family, surrounded by people who saw her primarily as a tool for advancing their colonial interests. During this time, she met John Rolfe, an English settler who had pioneered tobacco cultivation in Virginia. Rolfe wrote to the colonial governor, asking permission to marry Pocahontas, and in his letter, he expressed concern about marrying a heathen, but argued it would be good for converting the natives and maintaining peace. They married in 1614, when Pocahontas was about 18 years old. Whether this marriage was her choice or another form of captivity is debated by historians. What we know is that it served English interests, creating a period of peace between the Powhatan Confederacy and the colonists, a peace that would last only until Pocahontas's death. She gave birth to a son, Thomas, in 1615. In 1616, the Virginia Company decided to bring Pocahontas to England as a form of living advertisement for their colonial venture, proof that the savages could be civilized and Christianized. She traveled to London with Rolfe and their infant son, presented as Lady Rebecca Rolfe, an Indian princess converted to Christianity and English ways. She was paraded before London society, met with the royal court, sat for a portrait in English dress with an English ruff collar, her indigenous identity carefully packaged for English consumption. While in England, she encountered John Smith again, who had returned years before. According to his later account, she was upset to see him, addressing him with a term that suggested adopted family relationship, reminding him that he had called her father, and that she should therefore be allowed to call him father too. If this encounter happened as Smith described, it suggests her confusion or anger about the relationships and promises that had been made and broken. In 1617, as Pocahontas prepared to return to Virginia with her husband and son, she became ill. The ship had barely left the Thames River when she grew so sick they had to dock at Gravesend. There, at approximately 21 years old, Pocahontas died. The cause was recorded as unknown, possibly pneumonia, possibly tuberculosis, possibly one of the diseases common in London that her body had no immunity to fight. She was buried at St. George's Church in Gravesend, far from the forests and rivers of her homeland, far from her father and her people, far from the life she had been born to. Her son Thomas was too sick to travel, so Rolfe left him in England to be raised by relatives. Pocahontas never saw her home again. Her father Powhatan died the following year, reportedly of grief over losing his daughter. The peace her marriage had created dissolved, and warfare between the colonists and the Powhatan Confederacy resumed, eventually leading to the near destruction of her people. The woman whose name would become synonymous with harmonious relations between natives and colonists, whose story would be told and retold as a romance about bridging two worlds, had in reality been a child caught between those worlds, used by the English as a hostage and a symbol, married to a man who wrote about his concerns regarding her heathen nature, taken to England as exotic display, and dead at 21, buried in foreign soil, never to return home. The distance between the historical Pocahontas and the Disney princess who falls in love with John Smith and brings peace to two people's measures, the chasm between colonial reality and colonial fantasy. The story of Mulan, unlike Pocahontas, does not involve a verifiable historical person, but rather a legendary figure from Chinese tradition. The earliest known version of the Mulan story appears in a poem called the Ballad of Mulan, which scholars believe was composed sometime during the Northern Wei dynasty, roughly 386 to 534 CE, though the earliest surviving written version dates from the 11th or 12th century. This ballad tells of a young woman who takes her elderly father's place in the army, disguising herself as a man to spare him from military conscription. She serves for many years, distinguishes herself in battle, and when the war ends and she is offered rewards and official positions, she asks only to return home. Back with her family, she dresses in her women's clothing, and when her comrades see her, they are amazed, having never suspected she was a woman. The ballad is relatively short and does not specify exactly when these events supposedly occurred or provide details that would allow historians to verify the story. It has the quality of legend rather than history, a tale that may be based on some real event long ago, but has been transformed through centuries of retelling into something more symbolic than factual. Over the centuries, the Mulan story was elaborated in Chinese opera, novels, and other retellings, with different versions adding various details, changing the time period, adding romance, or different motivations. Some versions made her a filial daughter motivated purely by duty to her father. Others gave her romantic interests or made her a skilled warrior from childhood. Some versions ended with her returning happily to her family, while others had her committing suicide rather than being taken as a concubine by a barbarian Khan. The story served different purposes at different times, sometimes emphasizing filial piety, sometimes female capability, sometimes loyalty to country, sometimes the tragedy of women who transcend gender roles only to be punished for it. When Disney adapted Mulan in 1998, they drew primarily from the ballad but added many elements, including a romantic subplot with a fellow soldier, a dragon sidekick, and a much more developed villain and battle sequences. They set it during the Han Dynasty, though the ballad's time period is unclear, and most Chinese versions set it during the Northern Wei or other periods. The Disney version emphasized Mulan's journey of self-discovery, her struggle to honor her family while being true to herself, themes that resonated with Western audiences but were not particularly central to the Chinese source material. The question of whether Mulan was a real person is impossible to answer with certainty. No historical records from the time period mention a woman serving in the army under male disguise. No archaeological evidence supports the story. The ballad itself does not claim to be historical fact, but presents itself as a tale, a song about someone who may have existed long ago. Chinese historians and scholars have debated this for centuries, with some arguing that the story must have been based on some real event, while others contend it is purely fictional. The story created to explore ideas about duty, gender, and family. What matters more than historical truth, perhaps, is what the story has meant to Chinese culture over the centuries, how it has been used to think about women's capabilities, about the conflict between individual desire and family duty, about the nature of heroism and sacrifice. The legend of Mulan belongs to Chinese tradition in ways that transcend historical fact, and when Disney adapted it, they were adapting not just a story but a cultural symbol, and the changes they made, while necessary for their medium and audience, inevitably altered the story's meaning and its relationship to the culture that created it. Victor Hugo published Notre Dame de Paris in 1831, and while it is a novel rather than a folktale or myth, it became the basis for Disney's 1996 film, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and like all of Disney's adaptations, the film transformed the source material almost beyond recognition. Hugo wrote his novel with specific literary, historical, and political purposes. He was deeply concerned about the destruction of medieval architecture in Paris, particularly the Cathedral of Notre Dame, which by the 1830s was in terrible disrepair, used as a warehouse, its sculptures defaced, its beauty neglected. Hugo wanted to create a novel that would make people care about the cathedral, that would show its glory and its importance to French history and culture. He also wanted to explore themes of obsession, social outcasts, the corruption of religious and judicial institutions, and the way beauty and ugliness exists in the world, in complicated relationships. The novel is set in 1482, during the reign of Louis XI, and it features four main characters whose desires and conflicts drive the tragic plot. Quasimodo, the deformed bell ringer of Notre Dame; Esmeralda, a beautiful Romani dancer; Claude Frollo, the archdeacon of Notre Dame who becomes obsessed with Esmeralda; and Phoebus de Chatopus, a superficial captain of the guard, who Esmeralda believes she loves. Quasimodo was found as a hideously deformed infant, abandoned at Notre Dame on Quasimodo Sunday, and Frollo, then a young priest, took pity on him and raised him in the cathedral, training him to ring the bells. Quasimodo has become so deformed partly from birth and partly from years of ringing the massive bells, which have left him nearly deaf and even more grotesque in appearance. He loves Frollo as the only person who ever showed him kindness, and he lives in the cathedral towers, rarely venturing into the city where people mock and fear him. Esmeralda is a young Romani woman who dances in the streets with her trained goat, beautiful and full of life, though she exists at the margins of society, subject to the prejudices and laws that target Romani people as thieves and heathens. Frollo, who has devoted his life to study and religious discipline, sees Esmeralda dancing one night and becomes consumed with desire for her, an obsession that he experiences as demonic temptation, as proof of her witchcraft, as something that must be either possessed or destroyed. He orders Quasimodo to kidnap Esmeralda, but they are stopped by Phoebus, who rescues her. Esmeralda immediately falls in love with Phoebus, imagining him as a noble hero, not seeing that he is vain and shallow, interested only in seducing her as he has seduced many others. Quasimodo is arrested for the attempted kidnapping and sentenced to be flogged in the public square and displayed in the pillory for 2 hours. The crowd mocks him, throws rotten vegetables and stones, calls him monster and demon. He asks for water, and everyone refuses except Esmeralda, who, despite him having tried to kidnap her, takes pity on him and brings water to his lips. This act of kindness transforms Quasimodo's life, for he has never known gentleness from anyone except Frollo. And now this beautiful girl has shown him mercy when he deserved punishment. He falls in love with her, but it is a love that understands itself to be impossible, a devotion that asks nothing and offers everything. Meanwhile, Frollo's obsession grows more dangerous. He stalks Esmeralda, confronts her, tells her she must love him or he will destroy her. She refuses, terrified of him, and he arranges to meet her secretly while she thinks she is meeting Phoebus. When the real Phoebus arrives for an assignation, Frollo stabs him out of jealous rage. Phoebus survives, but Esmeralda is arrested for the crime, accused of using witchcraft to attempt murder. She is tortured until she confesses, and she is sentenced to be hanged in front of Notre Dame as a witch and would-be murderer. As Esmeralda is brought to the scaffold, Quasimodo swings down from the cathedral on a rope, grabs her, and carries her up into Notre Dame, claiming sanctuary for her. By medieval law, the cathedral is holy ground where secular authorities cannot enter to arrest someone. Esmeralda is safe as long as she stays inside, and Quasimodo devotes himself to her care and protection, giving her his own room in the bell tower, bringing her food and water, protecting her from Frollo, who still has access to the cathedral and continues to demand that she love him. She remains kind to Quasimodo, but cannot help her physical revulsion at his appearance, while she continues to love Phoebus, who has abandoned her, now that she has become an embarrassment and a legal problem. The novel builds toward a tragic climax during a night when the Parisian underclass, believing Esmeralda is being held prisoner, attacks Notre Dame to rescue her. Quasimodo, thinking they mean to harm her, defends the cathedral, dropping stones and molten lead from the towers, killing dozens of attackers. During the chaos, Frollo manages to sneak Esmeralda out of the cathedral and delivers her to the authorities, telling them where to find her. When she realizes Frollo has betrayed her, she finally understands the depth of his obsession and rejects him completely. Esmeralda is hanged in the Place de Grève at dawn, her body left hanging as an example. When Quasimodo discovers what Frollo has done, he finds the priest standing on a tower of Notre Dame, watching Esmeralda's execution. Quasimodo sees Frollo smiling, a terrible smile that reveals satisfaction at finally possessing her, even if only in death, and something breaks in Quasimodo. He pushes Frollo from the tower, and the priest falls, catching briefly on a gargoyle before falling again, tumbling down the cathedral walls to his death on the pavement below. Quasimodo, having killed the only father he ever knew, goes to the place where executed criminals are thrown. Montfaucon, a place of gallows and charnel pits. There, among the rotting bodies, he finds Esmeralda's corpse. He lies down beside her body and embraces it, and there he stays. Time passes, and when workers eventually come to the pit and find the two skeletons lying together, one normal and one grotesquely deformed, they try to separate them, but the deformed skeleton crumbles to dust at the touch. Hugo ends the novel with this image of Quasimodo's bones disintegrating as they are separated from Esmeralda's, his devotion lasting beyond death, his love so complete that even his skeleton could not exist without her. The novel is relentlessly tragic, and Hugo intended it to be, for he was writing about the cruelty of society, the way physical appearance determines how people are treated, the corruption of institutions that claim to serve God and justice, the impossibility of pure love in a fallen world. When Disney adapted this story, they faced an impossible challenge: how to make a children's film from material this dark. They created a largely new story, keeping the characters' names and basic relationships but changing almost everything else. Disney's Quasimodo is kind and innocent. Disney's Esmeralda survives and finds love with Phoebus. Disney's Frollo is defeated and falls to his death while Quasimodo survives. Disney's ending celebrates acceptance and shows Quasimodo finally being embraced by society. All the darkness, the obsession, the torture, the execution, the suggestion that love might be futile and society might be irredeemable, all of it was removed or transformed. Hugo's novel was not meant to comfort, but to disturb, to make readers think about injustice, to care about architecture and history, to understand that tragedy is real and that not every story ends well. The cathedral itself is almost a character in Hugo's novel, described in extensive detail, its history explored, its Gothic architecture celebrated, its presence looming over every scene as a testament to human creativity and faith, but also as a witness to human cruelty and suffering. When Hugo wrote Notre Dame de Paris, the real cathedral was in ruins, and he hoped his novel would inspire efforts to restore it. He succeeded. His novel helped spark a movement to preserve medieval architecture across France, and Notre Dame was extensively restored in the decades after the novel's publication. In that sense, the novel accomplished its goal, but the story within it remained dark, remained tragic, remained a reminder that beauty and horror exist together, that obsession can destroy, that society condemns those who do not fit its standards, and that sometimes the only peace available is the peace of death and dust. The legends of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table belong to no single author and no single time period, but rather accumulated over centuries, with each generation adding layers to the stories. The earliest mentions of Arthur appear in Welsh texts from the 9th and 10th centuries, where he is a warrior leader fighting against Saxon invaders, but these early references are fragmentary and unclear. Geoffrey of Monmouth's Historia Haegum Britanniae, written around 1136, transformed Arthur into a king and began many of the elements we recognize today, the sword in the stone. Though in Geoffrey's version it is Excalibur pulled from a stone, not a separate sword, the wizard Merlin, though his role is different from later versions, and the tragic end with Mordred's betrayal. Later writers, particularly the French romances of Chrétien de Troyes in the 12th century and Sir Thomas Malory's Le Morte d'Arthur in 1485, added the Round Table, the quest for the Holy Grail, the love triangle between Arthur, Guinevere, and Lancelot, and countless other elements. What we think of as the Arthurian legend is thus a composite, a tapestry woven from Celtic folklore, medieval romance, Christian allegory, and later Victorian revival, with no definitive version. When Disney made The Sword in the Stone in 1963, they drew primarily from T.H. White's 1938 novel of the same name, which was itself a retelling that emphasized Arthur's childhood education by Merlin. The Sword in the Stone appears in various forms in different Arthurian texts, and its meaning shifts depending on the telling. In some versions, it proves Arthur's royal bloodline, for only the true king can pull it free. In others, it demonstrates divine approval, God's sign of who should rule. The sword itself is sometimes Excalibur, the famous blade Arthur would carry throughout his reign, but in Malory's version, the sword in the stone is a different weapon that Arthur breaks in battle, and he later receives Excalibur from the Lady of the Lake, a magical being who rises from the water holding the blade aloft. This distinction matters, for it suggests that proving one's right to rule and obtaining the power to rule effectively are two different things. That birth or divine favor might make one king, but wisdom and magic are needed to actually govern. Disney's version simplified all of this, focusing on young Arthur's education and his accidental pulling of the sword, ending before the darker elements of the legend, the adultery and betrayal and civil war, can intrude. The full Arthurian cycle, when told completely, is one of the great tragedies of literature, a story about how even the best intentions and noblest ideals cannot prevent human weakness from destroying what has been built. In Malory's telling and most medieval versions, Arthur's reign begins in glory, but contains the seeds of its own destruction from the start. Arthur unknowingly conceives a child with his half-sister Morgause, not knowing they are related, and this child, Mordred, will eventually kill him. Arthur's best knight, Lancelot, falls in love with Arthur's queen, Guinevere, and she with him, and though they try to resist, their love affair undermines the kingdom's unity and honor. The quest for the Holy Grail divides the knights and leads to the death of many of the best among them, including Galahad, the only knight pure enough to achieve the Grail. Mordred, learning of Lancelot and Guinevere's affair, uses it to turn the knights against each other, and when Arthur must confront the betrayal, the Round Table fellowship shatters. Lancelot flees with Guinevere to France. Arthur pursues them, and while Arthur is away, Mordred seizes the throne and claims Guinevere as his own. Arthur returns to face his son in battle, and in that final combat, Arthur kills Mordred, but Mordred delivers a mortal wound to Arthur before dying. Arthur is carried away to Avalon, an island of magic and mystery, where some say he died and some say he sleeps, waiting to return when Britain needs him most. The kingdom falls into chaos, Camelot crumbles, and everything Arthur built is lost. The Arthurian legends have been interpreted as historical memory of a real Romano-British leader who fought the Saxons, as Christian allegory about the search for spiritual perfection, as medieval commentary on chivalry and courtly love, and as timeless myth about idealism confronting reality. What remains consistent across versions is the tragedy, the understanding that even the greatest king surrounded by the noblest knights cannot prevent betrayal from within. That human weakness will always find a way to corrupt even the purest ideals, that the Round Table's very perfection contained the conditions for its destruction. Merlin, the wise wizard who guided Arthur's rise, disappears before the end in most versions, sometimes imprisoned by his lover Nimue or Viviane, sometimes simply withdrawing from the world, unable or unwilling to prevent the tragedy he perhaps foresaw. His absence at the crucial moment suggests that wisdom cannot save those who will not save themselves, that magic has limits, that even the greatest advisor cannot prevent kings from making fatal mistakes. The legend resonates across centuries because it speaks to the eternal tension between idealism and reality, between what we hope humans can be and what we know they are. The stories of Robin Hood, like those of King Arthur, have no single definitive version but accumulated over centuries from various ballads, tales, and legends. The earliest references to Robin Hood appear in the late 13th century, with the name appearing in legal records as an alias used by criminals, suggesting he may have been a folklore figure even then. The earliest surviving ballads date from the 15th century and present Robin as a yeoman, not a dispossessed nobleman, as later versions would claim, living in Sherwood Forest with his band, robbing from the rich, giving to the poor, constantly outwitting the Sheriff of Nottingham. These early ballads are more violent than later, more romanticized versions. Robin Hood kills freely, showing little mercy to those he considers enemies. He is clever and skilled with a bow, but also capable of brutality, and the ballads celebrate his rebellion against corrupt authority without softening his methods. Over time, later writers added elements that made Robin more palatable to changing tastes. The love story with Maid Marian, the connection to King Richard the Lionheart, and the evil Prince John. The idea that Robin was a nobleman unjustly dispossessed who would be restored to his rightful place when the true king returned. Disney's Robin Hood from 1973 made the characters into anthropomorphic animals and emphasized the story's comedic and romantic elements, playing up the heroic outlaw, helping the poor, and the eventual restoration of good King Richard. But the original ballads offered no such neat resolution. In many versions, Robin Hood dies at the end, betrayed by the prioress of Hercules Abbey, who lets him bleed to death after supposedly treating him for an illness. In some tellings, he shoots one final arrow from his deathbed and asks to be buried wherever it lands. The ballads present a world where justice comes from outside the law, where the sheriff represents corrupt authority, where the church can be as villainous as the state, and where the only reliable virtue is loyalty to one's band of brothers. Whether Robin Hood was ever a real person is unknown, and probably unknowable. Like Arthur, he may be based on some historical figure, or figures whose deeds became legendary. Or he may be entirely fictional, a character created to embody resistance to oppression and unjust taxation. What matters is what the legend represented to those who told and retold it. Hope that the powerful could be outwitted, that the poor might find champions, that living outside the law might sometimes be more honorable than living within it. Across all the fairy tales and legends we have explored tonight, certain patterns emerge, repeated images and themes that appear regardless of culture or time period. The wicked stepmother appears in Snow White, in Cinderella, in Hansel and Gretel, in countless other tales from around the world. This figure is so common that scholars have sought to understand why. One explanation lies in historical reality. Maternal death in childbirth was common for centuries, and fathers frequently remarried, bringing stepmothers into households where they might favor their own children over their stepchildren. The fairy tale stepmother embodies real anxieties about divided loyalties, about inheritance, about children's vulnerability when their birth mother is gone. But the stepmother also serves a narrative function. She allows the father to remain somewhat innocent, to be seen as weak rather than cruel, while all the active malevolence is displaced onto the stepmother. This pattern reveals something about how these stories were told and why. They acknowledged difficult family dynamics while preserving patriarchal authority. They gave children's fears a name and a face, while suggesting that fathers, if they only knew what was happening, would intervene. The theme of transformation appears everywhere in fairy tales, from the Frog Prince to the Beast, from Pinocchio's wooden body to the Little Mermaid's tail becoming legs, from the ugly duckling to the swan. These transformations carry different meanings in different contexts. Sometimes transformation is a curse to be broken, sometimes a punishment for wrongdoing, sometimes a gift that allows transcendence. But underlying all these variants is a deeper pattern, the understanding that identity is not fixed, that surfaces deceive, that what appears monstrous might be noble, and what appears beautiful might be corrupt. Transformation stories allowed storytellers to explore the gap between appearance and reality, to suggest that true worth is invisible, to promise that suffering might not be permanent, that change is possible. The moment of transformation, whether the frog becomes a prince or the puppet becomes a boy, represents hope, the possibility that circumstances can be reversed, that magic exists, that redemption is available. In a world where most people were born into poverty and died in poverty, where social mobility was nearly impossible, where suffering seemed permanent, these transformation stories offered imaginative escape and the dream that perhaps, through magic or virtue or luck, one's nature could change. The number 3 appears with remarkable consistency. 3 wishes, 3 sisters, 3 tasks, 3 days, 3 attempts. Folklorists have noted this pattern across cultures and have offered various explanations. 3 is the smallest number that creates a pattern. 1 is singular, 2 is a pair, but 3 establishes rhythm and progression. 3 allows for development, a first attempt that fails, a second that nearly succeeds, a third that finally triumphs. 3 has religious significance in many traditions. The Christian Trinity, the triple goddess of ancient religions, the 3 fates who spin, measure, and cut the thread of life. In storytelling, 3 provides satisfying structure without becoming tedious. Enough repetition to create expectation, enough variation to maintain interest. When Cinderella attends 3 balls, when the prince searches for 3 days, when the protagonist faces 3 trials, audiences understand the pattern and anticipate the resolution. The number 3 embeds itself so deeply in fairy tale structure that it becomes almost invisible. A framework that shapes narrative without calling attention to itself. The presence of talking animals in fairy tales, from the wolf who speaks to Little Red Riding Hood, to the birds who help Cinderella, to the cricket who lectures Pinocchio, represents a worldview where the boundary between human and animal, between natural and supernatural, was more permeable than modern Western thought usually allows. In folk traditions, animals might be enchanted humans, might carry messages from the divine, might possess wisdom that humans lack. The talking animal serves practical narrative functions, providing helpers or adversaries, delivering warnings or rewards, but also reflects older beliefs about the world as enchanted, about nature as alive and communicative in ways we have largely forgotten. When the Grimm's birds peck out the stepsisters' eyes, when Andersen's swallow carries Thumbelina to safety, when Bossel's fairies care for sleeping Talia's babies, these are not random fantasy elements, but remnants of older worldviews where magic was expected, where the natural world was full of intention and agency, where anything might happen because the world was fundamentally mysterious. The evolution of fairy tales from their darker origins to their Disney versions represents more than just sanitization for children. It reflects fundamental changes in how Western culture understands childhood, morality, suffering, and storytelling itself. The original tales, whether from Grimm or Perrault or Bossel or Andersen, were created in worlds where child death was common, where violence was visible, where life was often short and harsh, and where stories were tools for teaching survival and obedience. These worlds believed children needed to learn about danger, needed to fear the consequences of disobedience, needed to understand that life could be cruel and that protection was not guaranteed. The stories reflected this worldview. They frightened because fear was considered an appropriate teacher. They showed graphic consequences because those consequences were real possibilities. Modern Western culture, at least in theory, seeks to protect childhood innocence, to shield children from harsh realities, to provide security and safety. Disney's adaptations reflect this shift, transforming tales of suffering and ambiguous morality into stories of clear good and evil, guaranteed happy endings, and the promise that virtue will be rewarded. Neither approach is inherently superior. Both respond to the needs and values of their times. The Grimms and their contemporaries were not trying to traumatize children, but to prepare them for a difficult world. Disney and modern adapters are not trying to deceive children, but to provide hope and comfort. What we lose in sanitization is the acknowledgement of suffering, the understanding that life contains genuine tragedy, the recognition that not every story ends well. What we gain is the possibility of hope, the suggestion that love can triumph, the comfort of believing in happy endings. Perhaps what matters most is remembering that both versions exist, that behind every Disney princess is a more complex, more troubled, more human original, that the stories we tell children shape how they understand the world, and that different worlds require different stories. The dark origins remain, waiting in old books and scholarly editions, ready to remind us that fairy tales were not always meant to comfort, that once upon a time they warned and frightened and prepared, and that even now, If we listen closely, we can hear the older voices whispering beneath the bright colors and cheerful songs. As we reach the end of our journey through these dark origins, through German forests and Danish shores, through French courts and Italian manuscripts, through Greek temples and colonial America, through the minds of collectors and creators across centuries, we might consider what has been lost and what has been gained in the translation from then to now. The stories endure because they touch something essential, some deep pattern that transcends culture and time. The beauty cursed to sleep, the girl covered in ashes who becomes a queen, the wooden puppet who becomes real, the mermaid who gives everything for love, the hunchback who loves what cannot love him back. These figures live in our imagination because they represent fundamental human experiences, transformed into narrative. We suffer, we hope, we transform, we love without return, we judge by appearances and learn to see truly. We seek belonging, we face consequences, we dream of redemption. The fairy tales and legends explore these experiences through the lens of magic and impossibility, creating safe distance that allows us to contemplate what might be too painful to examine directly. Whether told around medieval fires or animated by modern studios, whether frightening or comforting, whether tragic or triumphant, the stories continue because we continue to need them, to shape our understanding, to give form to our fears and hopes, to remind us that once upon a time, in a world very different and yet somehow the same, people told stories to make sense of the darkness, and those stories, in all their versions, bright and dark, continue to illuminate something essential about what it means to be human, to suffer, to endure, to imagine something better, and to find our way, one story at a time, through the ancient forest where all tales begin and end.